Welcome back to Storytime with Colin, and it's been a while since I've updated the channel, and today I'm here with Daniel. And then for those of you guys that don't know Daniel, he's going to give you guys an introduction.
Hi, my name is Daniel Wu. Some of you know my cars, the Tanto and the Chimpira S800, Honda S800. A lot of you know my cars, maybe don't know me. I'm an actor, actually. My full-time profession. I started my career in Hong Kong. I worked for 20 years in Hong Kong and China, and then I came back to the United States. Worked on a few productions. One was the Geostorm, Warcraft, Into the Badlands, the TV show I produced and starred in. And then I most recently did a movie called Reminiscence, which is coming out next year with Hugh Jackman as the lead.
So obviously I have a couple questions. Obviously I've watched you growing up, and I didn't find out you were a car guy until probably S800.
Right.
And so when I found out that Daniel was a car, I was like, okay, that's super cool.
Right.
But obviously same for all car guys. It's like, what's the story behind how you got started with cars?
So I think I've been into cars since a little kid. I think every boy's passion as a little kid is cars, and it started with like Matchbox cars for me. Mm-hmm. And I remember my dad, every weekend we'd go out and run errands and stuff like that, and we'd always stop at a store and get one Matchbox car. So every weekend I would get a new car. Mm-hmm. And so I had this crazy collection of all these cases and all this stuff. I kind of regret now because I remember in high school I sold them all. Right. Oh. But that kind of started my passion for cars. By 12 or 13, I had a subscription to Auto Week. Mm-hmm. And then by 15, I already kind of picked out my car. Because, like 16-year-old in America, a car equals freedom, right? Mm-hmm. I went to a private school, which was like half an hour away from my house. Mm-hmm. So I relied on my parents to drive me back and forth from school every day. And so by the time I, became of driving age, it was important to get a car, mm-hmm. right? To have that freedom to do whatever you wanted. And so by 15 and a half, I already had purchased my first car, mm-hmm. in lieu of getting my license. And so it was a E30 BMW 318i, mm-hmm. 1984. I remember my parents wanted me to get a Volvo 240. Mm-hmm. They had 240 wagon before, and they knew Volvos were like the safe car. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want their son to be injured in an accident, so they wanted me to drive the safe Volvo. Mm-hmm. But being a car guy already, I was like, nah, I don't want to be driving a Volvo. So I found in the classified ads that 318i BMW for, I think it was like $4,500 or $5,000, and then the Volvo was $6,000. It was like $1,000 cheaper. So I was able to convince my dad, look, this BMW, which is a better car, is $1,000 cheaper. Let's go for this. And so we went to see it, and then he kind of got convinced that that was a better deal. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to get the car I wanted right away. And that was a great platform to have for our first car, because now the E30 is like a classic platform. I had actually originally wanted a 2002 because my friends had 2002s. I'm old, I'm 45, I'm 20 years older than you. So when I was growing up in the 80s, the cool car was to have was a 70s 2002. But my parents wouldn't let me have that because they thought it was more dangerous. Mm-hmm. And so I settled for the E30, which is still, like I said, it was a great platform. Mm-hmm. Very well balanced car, slightly underpowered, which is good for a new driver. Mm-hmm. Stick shift. So the only modifications I did were suspensions. I lowered it, put stiffer springs in it, so it could handle better. And that kind of started my whole love and passion for cars and kind of modding cars. But then, as I got into college, I kept that car through my sophomore year of college, and then I ended up getting a truck, a Toyota truck that I had because I snowboarded a lot. I went to the University of Oregon, so that was important to have a four-wheel drive thing that I could ride around in the snow with. And then when I moved to Hong Kong in '97, I didn't have a car for like the first 5 years I was there because you don't really need a car in Hong Kong. Transportation is so efficient there. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, when I could afford a car, I got one. But you still really, modding a car is technically illegal in Hong Kong, mm-hmm. and they set up roadblocks and catch people and all that mm-hmm. kind of stuff. So even like technically changing a wheel, mm-hmm. Changing your wheels is not allowed, mm-hmm. right? It's technically illegal. So, and then there's no place to drive, right? There's cameras everywhere, there's roadblocks everywhere, and you just can't get away with driving mm-hmm. fast. There's no tracks around. You have to go to Zhuhai, and that's mm-hmm. a big deal to try and get your car over the border. Mm-hmm. So I never really did it, although I did have I had a 61 Jaguar XKE there. Mm-hmm. And that was really hard to deal with because the Hong Kong humidity does not like vintage cars. Mm-hmm. Just trying to keep that thing from rusting was like a huge effort. And so I dabbled in it, but I didn't really get back into it until I moved back here to the States. So that was like 5 years ago, 2016 or something like that. And I got my first track car, which is a Ford Focus RS. 2017, I had that. I started tracking that. Then I started getting the idea of like, hey, I want to build a car. You know, I've been watching all these car shows and then build cars. And I was like, I kind of want to do something like that. And so the Tanto was born out of that idea. And it was mainly, I was inspired by my buddy Sung Kang. He did that Fugu-Z, the 240Z for SEMA. I think it was 2 years before I did. So I called him up and I go, hey, so what was the deal with SEMA and blah, 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 what was all this stuff? And he told me about the ins and outs of it. And I'm like, okay, cool, I want to build a SEMA car. So I chose the 510 because the first modded car I've ever been in was a Datsun 510. I used to skateboard when I was a kid growing up, skating.
Oh, so those are like
a lot of the skaters had 510s, like 2 or 3 guys had 510s. And I remember this one guy, Dave Dunn, gave me a ride home in his 510. It was like, had a Nissan truck engine in it. It was like a V6 or something like that. And it was fast. And I was like, oh, this is cool. But then the 510 also has a lot of meaning for me because the Bay Area is the 510 area code. And so when I thought about doing a car for SEMA, I was like, okay, what, the 240 has been done, there's a lot of muscle cars been done, but not many people have done 510s. And so let's do a 510. And so through all the networks, I was introduced to Troy Ermish, who's basically the king of 510s. He raises and builds 510s. And so we started the build with him. And I was doing Tomb Raider at the time in South Africa. So I was in and out. And so I didn't actually get to wrench on it myself. And we had a deadline, we wanted to build it for SEMA. We entered it in the Battle Builders and we got top 10 in Battle Builders. So that was like my first taste of like a fully resto-modded car, like from the ground up, like tearing it down. We bought a stock 510 from Utah, perfect condition, stock 510. Some 510 people will hate me for it, for destroying a perfectly stock 510, but I just didn't want to have to deal with one that had been already messed with and trying to reverse engineer what someone else had done. And I'd rather start with like a clean slate. So we start with this clean 510. And I think they took 6 months and built it, and we got it done just like 2 days before SEMA and brought it down there. And like I said, we got top 10 at that thing. And so that kind of whetted my appetite for doing stuff. And then so a year later, this is a funny story. It's last year, 2019 of March, I had what I thought was food poisoning. And it turns out it was appendicitis. And I almost died because I didn't go to the hospital. I waited 3 days before going to the hospital. And then I had to have emergency surgery. And the doctor's like, if you waited like 1 more day, you probably would have died. And like this reality of like, shit, I almost died. And then also being middle-aged, like 44 years old at the time. I was like, you know what? Life's too short. Like I want to from now on, I only want to do fun things and things where I learn and can grow as a person, right? Because at this age, you can either, you've grown to a certain point, but by 45, you can either just stay in your lane and be comfortable and just plateau, or you can just keep learning, pushing yourself. And I was like, I love the car world, but I don't know as much as I think I should have, and I want to wrench on something and build something myself. So while I was in the hospital for 10 days, recovering from the surgery, I was like, let's build a car for SEMA. So I called up my buddy Ian Urban, who I share this garage space with. I'm like, hey, I have this Honda S800 in Hong Kong. I want to ship it over here. I want to build it for SEMA. You want to help me do it? And he had built this race car, this Audi over here, and he had experience building a car from the ground up. So I could only do it with somebody who had experience, And then we got into it, and then we busted ass and did this thing for 8 months. We went from March or April until November, and built this Honda for SEMA. And so that's kind of in short. This is my whole car life experience. And then in between, I've collected little cars here and there. I have the Lincoln Continental. I have the GT3 Touring. I have my dad's 911 G-body there. The 510 and this, and I've had a few other cars that got in and out of the collection. But I could only really have a collection here in the States. In Hong Kong, it's expensive and you can't really drive them anywhere, so it's kind of pointless to have a collection there. And so, yeah, now, having built a car from the ground up, now I have like a lot of confidence and experience to start messing with other stuff. So I maintain all these cars myself. As much as I can. If I can't, then I go to the mechanic. But it's been a fun hobby, and especially with COVID going on, I'm not working. There's nobody working in the film business right now, so it's kind of a great thing to have this on the side to be able to tinker with my toys.
Well, then one question is, out of what you have here, there's really only one modern car.
Yeah.
And then is there a certain reasoning behind that why you maybe prefer older cars, or?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think analog cars are a lot easier to work on. I don't know anything about reprogramming computer chips and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to mess with that stuff, right? And so, the older era cars from the 60s to 70s, you can still work on it pretty easily. And now with YouTube and all that kind of stuff, you can find people that have done all those things online. So it makes it a lot easier to work on those cars. And also, I like analog cars because they're much more visceral. It forces you to pay a lot more attention to driving. Like driving this 510, you can't look at your phone at all. You're just so, it forces you to be really attentive driving and listening to all the sounds and all that kind of stuff. There's no radios in any of my cars, all deleted. So just so that I can hear what the car is doing. And I like that better. And then also I have like affinity for cars of the 60s because I think that is the most passionate era of design in terms of, because now the fast cars especially, are designed based off of aerodynamics and engineering and computer figuring out what's the most efficient way to design a car for you. But back in the 60s, it was the idea of speed. So if you look at like old Ferraris or even Porsche or whatever, the design come from this idea of what they thought was fast, right? And you can see it's still handmade. It's still hand drawn, hand hammered out, the panels and all that kind of stuff. And the curves are more organic as opposed to being really like digital. Like a Lamborghini to me is like, it's a solution to a mathematical problem, but not a piece of art necessarily to me. And I see the man-made part of the art in a car. And the reason why I like cars so much is that they're functional pieces of art, right? It's not a car if it doesn't run, right? It doesn't, and it's not a beautiful car unless it's designed beautifully, right? And so you have to meld those two things together. And I think it has to do with me being an architecture major. I study architecture. As form follows function, but the design also has to make you emotional, and I think 60s cars and older cars bring that emotion up in me. Of course, there are modern cars that do that as well, but modern cars are so easy to drive nowadays that you can just you drive it like a Honda Accord, and you lose this sense of connection with the vehicle and the surroundings you're in. And I just like these cars, especially carbureted cars. You hear it's sucking in air. You hear all these noises, and it's instead of just like, I'm going to make a crazy loud exhaust. That's what the extent of modding like a modern car is nowadays, right? Or maximizing the performance out of the car. Sometimes it's not about the performance. It's not about getting as much horsepower as you can out of the car. It's finding the balance of the right amount of power with the right amount of feel, and it's all mechanical. And that's a really beautiful thing. It's like a symphony. It's just, it has to work perfectly, and all that's really interesting to me. How a system works.
Well, for me personally, I enjoy driver's cars. So like you say, cars that have a more visceral experience rather than just a loud exhaust. So that's why I personally don't prefer cars, modern cars as well. But what do you think, in terms of modern cars, maybe what are your more favorite? What would you prefer in a modern car that would make you take interest in it?
Well, the reason why I have the GT3 Touring is because I feel like it's probably one of the most perfect cars I've driven in terms of it being fine as a daily. You can drive it really tame and it's fine, but then it's also a beast on the track, and it's just a fine refined tool, right? And so it's like everything from the suspension to the drivetrain to the motor to this transmission, everything works in a way that it can feel like a vintage car in some ways. It screams and makes all this noise. It's very loud in there. It has less sound deadening than most Porsches have in it. So you feel it all. So it's a modern car that has all the modern things with it, but it also gives you that old school feel at the same time. So I can hear the gear shift changes. I can hear the transmission. I can hear all kinds of stuff that's going on in the car. And it makes me feel connected to the vehicle. And so when we're driving, like the drive we took today, I just feel like I'm in it, and it handles perfectly, it handles great. And to me, Porsche has a dial down, because when you design one car for 60 years, and it's a very German thing, right? Just do that one thing over and over and over and over and over again until you perfect it, right? That's really interesting to me. That's really interesting, as opposed to something like McLaren, who's doing different things all over the place, right? And there's no kind of lineage or anything. You kind of what they were doing in the earlier times and now is completely different, right? And you can say that about Porsche, but Porsche is still there's one ethos that's still there, and I'm not really a Porsche guy, but I kind of am because of that, I do like Ferraris, I do like other cars as well, but like for me, the ultimate driver's car to me is a Porsche. Also, reliability is a huge thing.
Oh yeah,
so
definitely.
So like Italian cars are usually out of the picture for me. Although I like them, they're also very passionate cars too. But yeah, I like the no frills kind of no bullshit about a Porsche. It's a driver's oriented car. That's it. There's no fancy bullshit in it. It's just a driver's oriented car. Yeah.
Do you think that the GT3 Touring is going to be the last modern sports car that you're going to have, or do you think there's
no? I'm sure at some point there's going to be something that comes out that tickles me, and I'll be interested in it. But for now, for the past couple of years, this one's been it. It's just the right amount of power. 500 horsepower is just enough. If you go up to like 700, like the GT2 RS, like twin turbo, all that stuff, it's a lot of it's not usable power. And so for me, it's about being able to put it all down, and I can do it on the track with this thing and not be, scared. Whereas though I've driven the GT2 RS on the track, I'm scared. It scares the hell out of me. A little bit of fear is good, but not too much.
But would you say that the GT3 Touring, the 991.2 GT3 Touring, is probably going to be the last driver's car out of the Porsche?
No, I don't think so. I mean, in terms of like manual transmission, probably it looks like the PDK is what they wanted to do. But it turns out that they wanted to do that years ago, and then enough people complained that they actually came out with the manual transmission. So they do listen to their customers, Porsche. So that's a good thing. So I think they'll keep making the 911Rs. There'll be something like that comes out later, I'm sure. And even a GT3 PDK is fine. It's fine, but I still like growing the gears. I know it's slower, but I like the fact that I'm engaged while I'm driving completely.
Well, it's like back to that topic. It's like the manual. It's like I always tell people. It's like if I was a very fast driver, I'd probably be, I'd be Lewis Hamilton now, right?
Right.
So why not rather enjoy driving, right?
Yeah. It's a different thing. It's like I'm not trying to be number one on track days. There is no number one on track days, right?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to enjoy myself, and part of that is, heel toeing and doing all that stuff, and like, yeah, it's a little bit slower than a PDK that just does it automatically for you. It's amazing, that thing, that gearbox. But at the same time, I like being able to have that control over it. Maybe I'm a control freak. Maybe that's what it is.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, but I like that element of a modern car, but having it feel old school in that way.
Because another thing is, I actually think that we're so busy in our day-to-day lives that, okay, driving is something that we do every day anyways, right? So why not drive a manual that you can kind of enjoy it for, for what it is? Yeah. Because there's not too many things in life that we can kind of just indulge in while we're doing it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. And it really forces you to indulge, just making shifts and deciding when you're going to shift, and then with the Touring, it goes up to 9,000, which is like, you have a long rev range and you hear the screaming engine. It's just beautiful noise.
And another question would be, since I guess we come from a very similar background, growing up in America, but then, being in Hong Kong and kind of knowing both sides of the culture, it's like, what, is there, I guess what I'm trying to ask is there a certain side that you might prefer, or what do you see as the goods and the bads of, maybe building a car here or building a car in, China or building a car in Hong Kong?
That's interesting. Well, there's a lot of different aesthetics.
Yeah.
Like if you go to Tokyo Auto Salon versus going to SEMA, there's huge differences there about how different cultures look at cars and how they modify them, right? And then you have the like subcultures, like you go to Japan, you see the Bosuzoku. Yeah. That stuff is totally like, whoa, what is this? Like, what are they? What was the ideology behind all this? And I like all of it because it's really creative and fun, Yeah, I think here in America, it's like about horsepower, maximizing your horsepower. But in lots of countries where you can't really drive that fast, it's about like handling or other things. Like if you go to Europe and you see why first of all, you know why all the good rally drivers are from Europe, because those B roads out there are amazing. They're like, and if you had those roads out here, we'd probably have a lot better rally drivers, right? But here it's like straight, wide highways, right? And so people drive muscle cars with like 700,000 horsepower so they can just punch it down the highway, right? But when you talk about like driving skill and all that, like I'm more into that. So that's why I kind of more into European and Asian driving culture versus American style driving culture, you know, because it's not necessarily just about the power, it's about your skill set. I think a lot of the racing I see here is about what you put in the car versus what your skill is.
What you can do.
Yeah, you know. So like I have fun on the track. Like the other day I was like chasing down this GT3 RS, right? It's like an older guy with the PDK thing, and he's pushing it to his maximum. But I know that car is much faster than my car, but I can keep up with it because the skills are different, you know. So you enjoy that, right? It's like, yeah, he thinks he's fast, but he doesn't know how to handle that power on the track, right? So it's fun, and it was, you know, it's a slow build up. It took me a while to get to that stage where I can like really push myself to that level. But yeah, I think that's the major difference. And then in terms of modding, I think in Hong Kong, in China, it's more like Japanese style, what the Japanese have been doing. And then here, it's more like power, muscle car stuff. And then obviously you have the supercar culture. That's a whole nother thing. And that seems to be the same around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Oh, obviously, except for like Japan, where they mod anything to any extent they want.
Yeah, like the crazy Liberty Walk body kids with like neon lights.
Oh yeah,
that's kind of stuff. I'm not into that stuff. Like I'm not into cars for it to be, hey, look at me. Like that's not why I'm into cars at all. And like that's why I never, like in my mid 20s and 30s, by that time I could afford like a supercar or whatever, but I just didn't want one at the time because number one, I was like, I didn't think I deserved it yet. You know, I felt like I wasn't of an age to appreciate that thing because I had a lot of friends that like, you know, once they made money, they bought a Ferrari, and then subsequently within a year they totaled it. You know, stuff like that. So I just slowly built up my car love, I guess, or collection. So to me, it was more about really appreciating and finding really like, you know, I'm a driving enthusiast, not necessarily a collector or anything like that. I collect cars that I enjoy the driving experience of driving. Even that Lincoln Continental, it's totally different than all these things, but it's totally enjoyable, right? When I can throw my whole family in it, 6 people can fit in that thing, 3 in the front, 3 in the back, top down, and we go out to the beach. Or last weekend we drove out to. Today we were up north. We went south to the beach to this farm. We went strawberry picking, right, with the top down. We all got nice tans, you know. We're still driving those country roads, but just cruising through it and enjoying the vehicle because it's like silent. The way it just goes around turns, and that has air suspension in it, so it's a little smoother.
Oh wow!
But I can drive it with one hand, so one hand across the seat back, one hand driving like this, and it's just like cool style. You know, it's really fun to drive that way, and you're not trying to get there fast. You know, you're just trying to get there with some style. You know.
Because it's like, you know, that's kind of like the very traditional kind of like the American dream, what we envisioned, you know, the 60s to kind of feel like.
Right.
But then at the same time, I feel like in California, you know, what I like about it is that there's so many different versions of like the American dream here.
Yeah.
You know, for me personally, it might just be like, you know, a Sunday where I have an old air-cooled 911.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you know, we can go to one car meet that's, you know, all old Porsches.
Right.
And then maybe in an hour we leave, we go somewhere else, and it's classics.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that, is that in the States, there's so much variety. There's so many little niches that you can get into, and there's so many knowledgeable and friendly people, like, you know, the Datsun world, awesome guys, super cool guys, like Mexicans that are into it, Asian guys are into it, white guys are into it, you know, and different cultures, and you meet them and you talk about the specifics of that car, you know, with them versus, you know, putting a KA engine, a turbocharge, or carburetor, blah, blah, you know, you have these debates all day long about just the 510, right? And that's really fun. Whereas I don't think you have as much variety in like Japan or Hong Kong, you know, it's like supercar guys, not much vintage car stuff in Hong Kong, but none in China, right? Because vintage cars are not allowed in China. So in China, it's a different thing. It's all new car stuff. So yeah, the variety is, and because it's been so long here, and people have been hot rodding cars since, you know, the turn of the century. You know, in fact, hot rodding started during the Prohibition era because those people that were smuggling alcohol needed to beat the cops, right? So they started modifying cars, and like that's where it all kind of started from. And it's kind of cool that it's allowed here. First of all, you can swap an engine, put whatever engine you want, and it's still legal and all that kind of stuff. You can't do that in Hong Kong. You know, trying to do an engine swap with no numbers matching, like you get in big trouble for that. you know.
You get in big trouble for just even having a different filter on your intake.
Yeah. I mean, they can technically tow your car for any reason that looks like it's not stock, you know. So it's not, when you're worried about that kind of stuff, it's not fun, you know. Whereas here, you can do a lot. There's so much more you can do.
And then one more thing that I learned when I came, I guess, to California was, you know, since you were born and raised here, right, in California, and there's just so much of a car culture that we didn't have in Seattle. We didn't have that rich history behind it. Because as I came down in California, met more older people, you know, maybe met more people even older than you, and they started telling me these things about maybe groups of people, or you know, the types of cars that they did, or the street racing they did, or whatever. There's just so much that originated from California.
Yeah. Especially LA and the tuner culture. Like the whole JDM tuner culture really started in LA. And so this is pre like Fast and Furious, like way before that.
I think it's like,
you know,
I think the 80s.
80s. Yeah, 80s is like when, I would say like Honda Civics probably were like the start of it all. And then you got into Acuras and blah, blah, all that stuff. But I think it was Hondas really that got, and then I guess the early Supras, the square version Supras.
Oh, Mark III,
yeah, the Mark
and then
III.
like the Celica Supra and stuff.
Yeah, and then it kind of took off from there. But like those guys, those old school guys, especially down in LA, there's a lot of them. In fact, me and Sun Kang are producing a documentary documenting the early tuner culture, right, and all those guys. And actually the diversity involved in that culture was like, you know, Mexican guys, Asian guys, black guys, white guys, all kind of mixed together doing that stuff. Whereas like muscle car culture was mainly white, you know. The tuner culture was very interesting, and like there's a really rich history of it down in LA. So we're kind of documenting that now, and we're going to do either a series or one documentary film about the early days of tuner culture.
Do you have an estimate, like a time frame estimate for when that's?
No, we're slowly, like, so Sung is down there doing interviews now, and we're slowly collecting this thing, and we're kind of trying to figure out what the story is. And we're just doing it organically. We're not trying to rush to do it. Plus, it's COVID now, so it's something really.
So you can't really see too many people.
But you know, hopefully, you know, we'll be able to shine a light on that culture that was considered niche or maybe more marginalized back in the day, but make it more. But now made very mainstream now because of Fast and Furious. You know, all that stuff. And I think a lot of people got into cars because of Fast and Furious, but they don't realize there was 20 years of history before that. You know, what all that culture was. You know, some people know Initial D or whatever, but they don't know the LA history of tuner culture
and how it all originated,
and how it all started. Yeah,
and you know, that's something that I really like enjoy. Where other people say, you know, they have the same idea where it's like we want to understand our passion. Like we just don't want to. Like, we want to know the history behind it. We want to know where we came from. Okay, why are we having this? Maybe it's a fad now. Maybe it's something that's going to stay forever.
Right.
You know, who knows? You know, we went from wide body stuff to, you know, sometimes back to restoring to stock body, OEM plus.
Yeah.
And I feel like you have a good appreciation for all varieties of cars.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the one biggest problem maybe within car culture is that there's not that appreciation for other you know, genres of cars.
Well, because the funny thing about cars, it becomes really tribal sometimes. You know, it's like, oh, you're a JDM guy, and so I only mess with JDMs, and even more specifically, I'm only a Honda guy, right? And you hate on other stuff, right? And it's like, there's no really point of doing that. You know, to me, I just respect, you know, a well-designed car. You know, first of all, a well-designed stock car. Not really tribal in that way. As you can see, I have like American, I have JDM, I have European, you know, all that kind of stuff. To me, like, the same thing like with movies is like, oh, I only watch art house movies. But to me, it's like a good movie is a good movie, right? If it's well put together. Because that's the other thing is like, what a lot of people don't realize, like, what it takes to actually get a car out there to market, right? It's difficult. And what it takes to actually build a car from the ground up. You have to, first of all, appreciate the effort and time and hard work that someone's put into modifying their car, right? That's one thing. And then just to hate on it because it's a different brand or whatever, that's kind of doesn't make sense to me. Like, to me, it's like if it's a well-designed car, well-built, and effort and heart was put into it, then it's worth respecting, you know? To me, the ones I don't respect is like, oh, let's do whatever's trendy. Oh, this body kit's trendy, and then these mods, titanium this, titanium that, and put this car together, and then 10 years later, you look at it and like, this thing looks dated, right? So when I look at a car, I look at timelessness, right? And even when I design cars, like I design these ones so that when, you know, 10, 15 years down the line, I look at it and go, I still like it. You know, this color is still fine. You know, like it's not fluorescent orange. You know, it's not some color that like 5 years down the line I'm gonna hate. You know, everything about it I still like, and I, you know, maybe slowly make it better, but there's nothing major I need to do to it, or it's going to be like a total tear down and rebuild again. I want something that's going to last over time. And I think that comes from my architecture design background. Is like when you design buildings, you want a building to last over 50 years, 100 years. People don't design that way anymore. This is such a disposable culture now.
Yeah.
Like when I was a little kid, when your TV broke, you took it to a TV repair shop and someone fixed it and you brought it back home and it still worked, right? Nowadays, like when your TV breaks, nobody's gonna fix it. Yeah. In fact, it probably costs more to fix it than to just throw it away and buy a new one, right? And something bad about that that I don't like. And so same thing with design. People go, okay, I'm gonna do whatever is cool and trendy. And 5 years down the line, I'm gonna change this all out and put this in. It's like, no, I take a more sustainable approach to design and want something that is classic, cool, classic, and sustainable, or have longevity.
Well, I think we're both on a tight time frame today, so we'll definitely I hope you guys learned quite a bit about Daniel, and I hope you guys keep up with him. And I'm very excited to see the documentary that you and Sun Kang that you guys are producing. We'll see. Probably in the next year or so it'll come out. So I'm very excited for that, and I guess we'll both catch you guys next time on I guess. Maybe down the road, either maybe a follow-up interview. Yeah, maybe in LA or maybe back here in San Fran again. Who knows? Okay, so thank you for your time. Thanks for having me, Colin. It was awesome. Yeah, bye.